Hello, my name's Esther Eidinow and I'm Professor of Ancient History at the University of Bristol. And in this set of lectures we're going to think about oracles. In this section, in this first lecture, I'm going to give you a little bit of background about what an oracle is. So the who, the what, the why, the where and the how, and that will give you a little bit of an overview before we then go into detail in the other 5 lectures. So the first thing you need to know about oracle as a term is that it's used to describe 3 different things in modern literature. So we find it used to describe the site, the institution of an oracle, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But you also find it used to describe a person who gives out oracular statements, and in fact to describe the oracular statements themselves. So it's always worth checking just how that word is being used when you come across it. We're going to focus in this set of lectures mostly on the sites where oracles are founded, so the institutions of oracles. And these are places where people go in order to communicate with some form of the supernatural. And we'll take that statement a little bit apart so that we can understand the details of it. So when I say it's a site, it's usually a temple or a sanctuary, but there were much smaller sites where you could consult an oracle. For example, you might walk up to a statue in a marketplace and there would be perhaps a set of dice there, and you would roll the dice, say a prayer, and then see how the dice fell, and consult a set of inscriptions on the side of the statue base, and that would give you your oracle. But the oracles that we're largely looking at, and that we're going to look at in more detail in the next couple of lectures, are the institutional ones, the temples or sanctuaries that are dedicated to gods. And this gives us something about the who of oracles. So most oracular sanctuaries are a place where you could literally go and talk to a god. Some oracular sanctuaries you could talk to a hero, and it's said by some scholars that there were also oracular sanctuaries where you could talk to the dead, but there are some other scholars that dispute that. So these oracular sanctuaries are located across the ancient world. One of the important things to understand is the ubiquity of this kind of institution. They are everywhere. So if you think about Greece and mainland Greece, there are incredible numbers of oracle sites across mainland Greece and down amongst the islands. But if you look out to the west, so out to Spain or Hungary, even the UK, you're finding oracular sites in those areas as well. And then if you look out east, even as far as the Black Sea, but you've gone through Syria, Lebanon, all of those, Turkey, all of those areas, you're looking out to the east, there are oracles there. There are oracles up above to the north of mainland Greece, so up in what we now call Albania, and there are oracles down in, a lot of oracles, down in North Africa, especially in Egypt. So we've got a vast number of different places where individuals could go and talk to the gods or talk to heroes. And it's important to remember that because there's a multiplicity of personifications of the gods, there are lots of different oracular sanctuaries which are dedicated, for example, to Apollo, where you actually go and you consult somehow with the god Apollo. Or with the god Zeus. With heroes, they tend to be located just in one place. So you're going to go and talk to, for example, the hero Trophonius at Lebedea in Boeotia, and that's where you go and talk to him. So what about how? This is one of the rather delicious things about oracles, is that there were lots of different ways of talking to the gods. So the ones we're going to look at in later lectures are perhaps the most famous. That's the Oracle of Delphi, where you go and talk to the Pythia, who is a woman who is possessed by the god Apollo. And then there's the Sanctuary of Dodona, where, in contrast, we actually don't know how that oracular consultation took place, but we'll look at that in more detail. But there were loads of other ways of consulting the gods. So there was, for example, a sanctuary of Demeter at Patrai, where you would do it by gently lowering a mirror into spring water, and seeking the answer to your question in that way. There were lots of dice oracles, many of them situated on streets, in marketplaces, so they were very easy to access. And that's another thing to bear in mind about these oracles, is that they were more or less accessible to ordinary people, and we will talk about that as well. So we should also think about when these kinds of institutions are functioning. And the very earliest that we know about is actually an Egyptian oracle that was given to a female pharaoh called Hatshepsut. And that was in the 15th century BC, and that confirmed her claim to the throne. So it was quite an important oracle. And in some ways, it begins to show us the ways in which oracles are important, the ways in which they're used by different cities and states. That it's often in questions that are related to a city or a state. But we also know of oracles, particularly, for example, one we'll look at later, the Oracle of Dodona, where it's individuals who are going to consult these oracles, and quite ordinary men and women who are going to do this. So that's the earliest oracle that we know about. And generally oracles stop being used. Well, there's a ruling by Theodosius the Great in the late 4th century CE, which officially stops the oracles being used. We know that a few carried on being used after that time, but generally after that, oracular use seems to have come to an end. Some of those sanctuaries then become sites where Christian worship of some kind takes place instead. But on the whole, we're looking at a pretty wide span of time during which oracles are in operation. So perhaps they worked.